Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be talking about something a little bit different. Difficulty of the raid, or basically the overview of Sepulcher. So for a lot of people who have been paying attention on social media and things like that, there's been a lot of changes happening to the raid. There's been a lot of nerfs happening over the last couple of months, and I wanted to make this video for like a month or so now, because right now I'm progressing on Mythic Jailer. And Mythic Jailer has really opened up my eyes about the add-on issue, and I'll talk about the add-ons later on. I might have a different opinion than a lot of you, but if you want, you can skip forward to the add-on section. But I wanted to talk about the difficulty and the aim of Sepulcher in terms of how Blizzard approached the end tier rating, because this is the last raid for Shadowlands. Some people might say that's really good because they want to get the next expansion and they enjoy Shadowlands, but this is the last expansion, or this is the last patch of Shadowlands, or the last raid of Shadowlands. Again, there's going to be some things happening in Season 4, but there's no new raids coming out. I do not oppose the fact that Blizzard tries to experiment at the end of a tier. That's honestly one of the best things that they have done in a long time, because they try to come up with new ways and new things at the end of expansion that might be brought into the next expansion. This is their testing phase, and I feel like Sepulcher was one of the raids where they did a lot of testing in terms of the difficulty of the raid. So let's go and start off and have a look at some of the changes that Blizzard did to bosses. These are all the bosses in the raid, and these are the changes that they've received. And you can see here, again, it's kind of hard to read, but if you scroll up, you can see here Anduin, you can see Halondros. This nerf here on the 25th of April really decimated Halondros in a really meaningful way. Because Halondros is one of those fights that doesn't have a lot of mechanics, but the one mechanic that it has is extremely punishing. I actually think it was a really well designed fight, because there is not a lot of mechanics. It's just one big thing that you need to pay attention to, and if you don't do that, you'll wipe the raid over and over and over and over and over again. So this nerf here really decimated. If you look at Anduin, this is a pretty big list of changes. I don't think I've ever seen this many changes being made to a raid tier boss ever. If you need to make this amount of changes to a raid boss, that means something went wrong or something wasn't exactly how they wanted it. I'm progressing Jailer right now, and I can tell you this boss actually requires... It's the first time where I'm like, I need to have 20 weak auras to actually be able to beat this boss, and it doesn't feel all that amazing. So, it is clear to see the difficulty of the raid, that the initial release of the raid was aimed at Raise the World First guilds. That's fine, because most of the normal CE guilds and things like that, they're not going to be touching a lot of this content early on. You need a force set and all of that, so it makes a little bit of sense. But it's also worth noting that even some of the heroic raid bosses felt a little bit overtuned, where Galen had a mechanic in heroic where some person fails, it's going to wipe the raid, and it maybe felt a little bit too punishing. Jailer was a hard boss for heroic raid there content and things like that. But again, I mentioned it. Mythic raiding, it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be like, you finish Mythic raiding, you're kind of done with the game, or at least it used to be. That kind of mentality used to persist throughout World of Warcraft expansions, because raiding, let's be honest, is probably the front of World of Warcraft. The raiding is the main feature of World of Warcraft for a lot of the advertisement that World of Warcraft does and things like that, and it's been one of the main features for a really long time. Mythic Plus came about a couple of expansions ago and things like that, and it was really cool to do Mythic Plus, and I feel Mythic Plus is a really interesting concept. But I still think, based on the number of changes and features that they added, raiding is still number one, and then Mythic Plus is coming out as second. So this is the Sepulcher of the first ones in terms of the progression. How many wipes are you expected to get if you're progressing Mythic raiding right now? Again, a lot of these kind of graphs here, it's almost impossible to keep up with the amount of nerfs that happen to bosses. So a lot of the accounts can fluctuate a bit, because there's never been this many changes to a tier that I can remember. A lot of the bosses, entry bosses, honestly, you can see here, pull count, they're very easy, or they're at least, they should be achievable by a lot of the raid tier or raid guilds out there, whether you're a hardcore guild or whether you're a casual guild, you're progressing these bosses. I think a lot of the bosses are going to be progressed by pugs as well. It shouldn't be too hard. Zymox is a little bit harder. You can see average 45 pulls. Pantheon is a bit harder, it requires a lot of healing. Resto Druids are really OP here. Skolex is one of the easier bosses, but then you go into what I call the guild killers. That's what I'm going to refer to. Halondros, before the nerf to Halondros, and I talked about the nerf, we kind of looked at it here before. The nerf here for 25th of April absolutely decimated this boss in such a way that it was a huge nerf. Halondros was not the second last boss. It was not. It was a mid-tier boss. It was actually an early boss. And the mechanics for launches were actually really interesting because there weren't many mechanics. There was just one really big mechanic that required personal responsibility, because if you fail, you wipe the raid. And on average, you can see here 175. There's plenty of guilds out there who had 200 wipes on this before the nerf. It wasn't uncommon to have 200 wipes on Halondros, especially if you have a roster that keeps on changing. The biggest boss, or raid boss, for a lot of these casual mythic raiding guilds is attendance. You might not actually have the same 20 people all the time, and you might have to swap in new people. And relearning Halondros, especially if you have the bombs, is an absolute nightmare. So if you're struggling with attendance as a raiding guild, Halondros, it's not uncommon to have 200 wipes. Now, after the nerf, I'm not actually quite sure. I think it's a lot less now, so it's not that big of a deal. But be prepared to wipe on Halondros. That's something to be expected. Then Lihovum, you're probably going to kill Lihovum before Halondros. Then you're probably going to go Halondros and Anduin. And this is where you're starting to feel burnout. This is where I started to feel burnout. And this is basically the point of the video. How should this raid burnout be handled? And is it important to have these really hard bosses one after another and throughout the raid here? So Anduin is a raid boss that felt like an end-tier boss. Anduin has multiple phases. He has multiple different mechanics where you have to have different groups going inside, different groups staying up. It required a lot of coordination. The last phase of Anduin is actually kind of a joke, so it was interesting because the first couple of phases are really hard, but then once you get to the last phase, you can pretty much kill it within a couple of tries. Now, it has been nerfed really significantly, so Mythic Anduin is no longer as big of a problem as it used to be. Before that, Anduin was absolutely insane. Like, you will be pulling 200-300 wipes on this. This is a end-tier raid boss. Like, you could easily pull 300 wipes as an average guild on this, especially if you have problems with raid roster. For most people who don't know, in Mythic, if you're going downstairs, you have to have enough DPS, you have to have enough CC, and the group that goes downstairs leaves adds upstairs for others to handle. And those adds are really easy to kill. That's not the problem. The problem was killing those adds at the right time to break out the people inside. So not only it was a DPS check, a CC check, a healing check with the barrier and things like that, but it was also, can your DPS not DPS and break out people too early, which actually surprisingly was causing a lot more issues than I first expected, because DPS brain type of thing. So Anduin ended up being a real, I think it was a really good fight. I want to go on record here making this video. I actually think Sepulcher raid bosses are really, really cool. I think a lot of the raid boss design is really, really good. I think there's only a couple of bosses that I don't really enjoy and I don't want to progress, but overall I think the bosses are really interesting and they've been designed in a really cool way. But I do think that a lot of them required a lot of nerfs for those normal raiding guilds to progress. So you kill Anduin, you honestly probably exhausted at this point. You spend like 200 wipes on Halondros, you spend like 200-300 wipes on Anduin. You probably struggled from, roster issues. And it almost feels like the raid should be over. I honestly feel after killing Anduin, I felt like this is it. We cleared everything. I don't want to do anything. This was the raid. This is where some people came into suggestions or conspiracy theories that the last 3 bosses were meant to be, that was supposed to be another tier. And it was just got tagged on because they wanted to ship out the next expansion faster, which is up to you to decide whether it's true or not. But then you had Lord of Dread, actually one of the easiest last bosses. It does not require a lot of practice. I think you can get that down pretty easily. Regalian was actually pretty hard, especially before the nerfs. On average, you can see here 144 wipes. It was a decently hard boss, maybe not an insanely hard boss like Anduin or Halondros, but it still required some personal responsibility, and it required a lot of personal responsibility because if you fail, you wipe the raid. In the same way that you had the same mechanic in Heroic, which then got nerfed. Because it didn't feel right that Heroic would have this much personal responsibility. And then we move on to Jailer. Oh boy, Jailer is a boss. I'm not gonna lie, this is the first boss where I really felt the need for add-ons. So for the people who don't know, the phase 1 of Jailer requires you get the bombs, and then you have to jump into the holes, and you have to jump into the right ones, because it's gonna get progressively harder if you don't organize how you do these bombs. And there's a really popular WeCore out there that handles this, and honestly this is the hardest part of phase 1, going into the right holes and managing that. Now, Jailer has been nerfed significantly in the last couple, like every single boss has been nerfed so many times because it's just too hard from the initial iteration of the bosses. So The jailer nerfs have made it easier, but you can see that weak auras are really important. I'm actually not quite certain how you would do this boss without weak auras, without assigning the people that go into the right bombs. That's phase 1. There is a lot more mechanics that you have, but that's probably the hardest phase 1 mechanic. Phase 2 is actually quite easy, and phase 3 is where you have a bunch of abilities happening at the same time. You have a bunch of weak auras, and it's one of those bosses where I'm like, damn, if I didn't have weak auras, I don't think I would be able to progress this boss at all. And now we're going into the segment of add-ons. So I think right now there's a lot of discussion around add-ons, and there's 2 different parties, and I think there's 2 different discussions happening right now, and I think they are prompted from Jailer, because I think Jailer is such an add-on intensive boss that you cannot progress without these add-ons. And Blizzard mentioned before, and they kind of implied that, hey, when we're designing bosses, we kind of assume you have weak auras, and we're going to make those bosses a little harder or a lot harder, because weak auras are going to simplify those mechanics significantly. And then I can see where people are coming from. This is the camp 1 of add-on discussion. Should bosses be designed around weak auras, and should weak auras be so integrated in raid design, and should everyone need to have weak auras in order to actually progress mythic raiding content, even heroic content to some extent, you know, add-ons like for Lord of Dread, you know, Among Us and things like that? Should that be a thing? And I kind of agree with a lot of discussion here. I don't think weak auras should play as big of a part as they do right now in mythic or raiding content, because the fact that Blizzard has to design Jailer, like Jailer, if you look at the list of mechanics that Jailer has, the list of mechanics that Jailer has is probably more than the whole classic, WoW Classic, is combined with all of the bosses out there. Like, Jailer has so many mechanics that it's actually wild when you first have to read through the different strats, tactics, and things like that. And Blizzard has to do that in order to make a boss really hard, because people have, or they will have weak auras, they will have add-ons that make it easier. And I can see where people are complaining. They're unhappy at the fact that bosses are getting so much more difficult because of the add-on inflation. That's what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it add-on inflation. Bosses get harder because add-ons are getting better. So there is something to be fixed here, but I don't see a good way of fixing this without breaking everything else, because there's another camp. So this is the camp 2 of add-on discussion, which want every add-on to be banned. And I honestly feel that is ridiculous, because the best thing about World of Warcraft, for me, at least this is my video, this is my personal opinion, I love the fact that I can customize everything about World of Warcraft. I love the fact that it's so open. There's so many different add-on developers, there's so many cool add-ons out there that make your life so much easier, because let's be honest, game developers don't always keep up with what people want, and this is very evident for games like Final Fantasy and World of Warcraft. They cannot keep up with the cool new things that are happening out there. And add-on developers usually are the first ones to kind of, you know, get to those pain points. So I love the fact that World of Warcraft is so open. I love the fact that you can bring in a lot of these add-ons and customize everything that you want about the game and make it feel your own. Do I like the fact that add-ons make, or weak auras make, bosses more difficult and make them insanely convoluted to an extent that it can become really painful? No, I feel like that could be fixed. Maybe, I don't know, limiting the weak aura usages or something along those lines, so bosses feel a little bit more manageable, if you know what I mean. So I think there are 2 groups, and I agree with one of the groups. I do not want add-ons to disappear, because I think this is one of the best parts of World of Warcraft. I do want bosses to become a little bit easier at the cost of less add-on usage. So first and foremost, this is a discussion video. I talked to you about the difficulty of the raid, the amount of changes and nerfs that raid received, Sepulcher, Anduin in particular, and I'm talking about how Blizzard is approaching the last raid tier in this expansion with kind of an experimental mode. We're trying to make it really hard for the Race to World First guild, so they're taking like weeks and weeks to clear it, and then we're consistently nerfing it across the board so the other guilds can do it. Which is actually a pain, because if you're a guild that's approaching or kind of been progressing Anduin for a really long time, or Halondrus in my example, we've been progressing Halondrus for a really long time and we're about to kill it, but then Halondrus gets absolutely decimated with a nerf, and all of a sudden all of those tries that we did become invalidated because everyone is going to kill Halondrus with a nerf coming next reset. So you almost feel like you're cheated out of a progression kill. That doesn't feel great. So if a boss gets nerfed during or mid progression, it doesn't feel amazing for a guild that's already put in a lot of effort into it. So I think consistent nerfs to bosses can be really painful. but if they're needed, they're needed. So first of all, how Blizzard should approach race to world first content? Should they make bosses really, really hard? Because I know a lot of people out there are going to be like, I don't want race to world first guilds to kill the bosses in the first week, and then they're going to progress mythic rating and they're like, this is too hard, I want way more nerfs. So it's pleasing both of these camps, and it's very, very hard. So how to fix this? Honestly, there is no, I don't have a clear idea or clear solution for this in terms of how to make race to world first content fun to watch and how to make those bosses, how do I say, fun for the rest of us, for the people who don't have that time, who don't have that time investment. That's the first thing. Second of all, how do you feel about the mid-tier boss, Anduin and Painsmith in the previous expansion or previous raid? How do you feel about these mid-tier bosses being extremely hard and extremely difficult, instead of being the last boss being quite difficult or quite wipe intensive? I don't know how to feel about this right now, because Blizzard is doing this for the last couple of years. Painsmith was really hard, he was a mid-tier boss, he was a big raid block for a lot of the guilds, and Anduin is right now. Halondra's was like that, then Anduin was like that. So there's two kind of a bosses that are kind of a blockers in this tier. That's why it's Sepulcher, in my opinion, is a lot harder. How do you feel about being stuck halfway through a tier and spending a lot of wipes on this? That's another thing that's really interesting. I also want to know your opinions about add-ons right now. I don't think there's a clear solution for add-on development right now in terms of raids. Maybe there should be some kind of restrictions in terms of weak cores when it comes to raid content, but at the same time, I don't want WoW to lose out on its add-ons, because I think it's one of the best things that they have. I really want to know your opinion about this. And again, mythic raid content should be hard, but should it be this hard? Should bosses require this many nerfs for your average mythic raiding guilds to get there? And especially to get there without burning out. I think the number one issue right now for a lot of these average mythic raiding guilds are rosters, are people leaving, people taking a break, people getting burnt out. This almost feels a lot of the time like you finish work, you come back to play World of Warcraft, and then you're wiping to a boss 200 times. It's almost like you're coming back from work to do more work. But maybe I'm just being cynical about this. Maybe I'm just getting older and I want to go easier route and things like that. I want to know your opinions. This is a discussion video. Let me know how you feel about this, and I'll see you in my next video.